The lifeboat scenario. The lifeboat scenario is one in which usually there are two people in a lifeboat with no food, no water, no means of sustaining their lives, out in the middle of an ocean or similar body of water, and no land nearby, no rescuers on the way that they know of. The typical question asked in the lifeboat scenario is, should person X murder and then eat person Y in order to survive? It's important to consider the question itself and what it's designed to do. By removing the possibility of production, by making it impossible for any of the lifeboaters to produce what they need to survive, the lifeboat scenario effectively says that rationality, man's own mind, is of no use in this scenario. So it's a sneaky attack, actually, on rationality, or the role of rationality in man, or in the definition of man. It effectively seeks to do the equivalent of saying, if man were a mindless brute, then would it be ethical for man to murder and eat the other lifeboater? In other words, by changing the metaphysics, or at least creating a highly artificial metaphysical situation in which production is not possible, the questioner hopes to have the same effect as though he were asking, if man were not man, then would it be ethical for man to do X? Now consider the purpose of ethics. The purpose of ethics is to establish or to discover a code of ethics, or a code of behavior, which will allow man to survive on Earth in this life. So the first question is, what is man? What is the nature of man? Well, man is the rational animal, as Aristotle would say. Man survives only because, and only through the use of, his rational faculty. In other words, to survive, man has to solve problems using logic and considering only the observable facts of reality, the things for which there is ultimately physical evidence. If he fails to do that, if he makes up the facts upon which he makes his decisions, or if he fails to think logically about the evidence, then ultimately there's a higher risk that he will die. In fact, if he consistently acts irrationally, he certainly will die. He can only at that point be fed or put on life support. He cannot provide for himself. And ethics at that point, at the point where a person's not providing for themselves, ethics is utterly irrelevant to them. They're not making decisions of life or death. They're just existing because someone's got a tube in their throat or what have you. Now, of course, you can choose not to be rational. And when you choose not to be rational, you're choosing ultimately not to use the only tool you have that gives you control over your fate, that allows you to survive without someone putting you on some sort of life support. And so when we say man, we're talking about the kind of human being who has decided to think, the kind of human being who has decided to apply their rational faculty to the available evidence around them. A person who doesn't do so is not, formally speaking, acting as himself or acting consistently with his nature. He's not man. He's human, but he's not man. Man's rational faculty allows him to produce the values that allow him to survive, the values upon which his survival and happiness depend. If he does not produce values, he will have no values to consume. Cannibalism is not the production of values, it's the consumption of values, and of course it's limited by the amount of available people to murder and eat. So in a lifeboat scenario, it's not the case that a person who has chosen not to think can survive by cannibalism. No, they'll survive in the short term. They'll extend their life for some amount of time, but eventually they'll be right back in the same boat of the person who has chosen not to think. They will die because they don't have that life support available anymore. There's no tree of human beings from which they can pluck their food. Cannibalism, in other words, is not only irrational, but it's short-sighted. It's, in fact, it's worse than short-range thinking. It is point-blank thinking. You're in the emergency, you are starving, you eat right then, right there. You're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about how this is going to affect your future. You're thinking about only filling your stomach right then, right there. So it's worse than thinking short range. It's, as I say, point blank thinking. The rational person, on the other hand, needing to produce values has to think long range, lives long range, thinks about the effects of things done now on their happiness and their survival in the longer term. In the lifeboat, of course, there's no opportunity to produce, so that's not possible. But it is not the case that by turning to cannibalism one is somehow thinking long range or even short range, or one is being rational. It isn't a case of being rational at all. It's a case of abandoning rationality, abandoning long-term thinking, short-term thinking even, thinking more or less as an animal would think, consuming and not guaranteeing one's future at all. Now we can break the schools of moral philosophy into three general groups: the Subjectivist, the Intrinsicist, and the Objectivist. And let's look at how each of those three would approach the lifeboat scenario. The Subjectivist effectively says any range of things along the lines of, well, you know, nature isn't knowable, the facts of reality aren't knowable, or they're chaotic and unpredictable, or man's senses are unable to detect what reality is really like. So the Subjectivist effectively is saying that if there is going to be a code according to which he or she guides his life, it certainly isn't going to be founded upon the facts of reality. The Subjectivist has given up on the possibility of knowing the facts of reality. So any system of ethics that they choose to adopt is adopted arbitrarily, designed somewhat arbitrarily, even if in some sense it's considered to be fair, or to be, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's got nothing really to do with reality. It doesn't concern itself with the facts of reality, or with knowing the facts of reality, or with being determined by the facts of reality. The Subjectivist merely makes it up. So for example, there's no reason for a Subjectivist to reject this sort of philosophy, that in a lifeboat it is right for the lighter person to eat the heavier person, to kill and eat the heavier person, because under that scenario the lighter person will have food for a greater number of days than if the reverse were done. In other words, if the heavier person were to kill and eat the lighter person, that person, the heavier person, would have food for fewer days. So you can say that, well, obviously the correct solution is for the lighter person to kill the heavier person and eat the heavier person over a greater number of days, thereby increasing the likelihood that the lighter person will be found and rescued, and etc. But that's completely arbitrary morality. There's no way to prove it. It's not connected in any way with the facts of reality in terms of right and wrong. The standard is completely arbitrary. And in fact, the moral subjectivist really has no way of distinguishing the lifeboat scenario from any other scenario. There's no way to objectively, or with reference to the facts of reality, to justify having a different response when in a lifeboat with no food than when being on the streets of New York. The subjectivist could not say that it's wrong to murder and eat someone in New York, but right to murder and eat someone in a lifeboat, except by arbitrary assertion. There's no principled way of doing it that's in any way connected with the facts of reality, or that's in any way dictated by the facts of reality. Nor could the subjectivist say that, you know, the rules are different for hungry people versus people who aren't hungry. Again, it would be completely arbitrary if they were to assert a difference. So that's the moral subjectivists in the lifeboat. They basically make it up. There is no objective right or wrong. It's impossible for them really to prove anything they might assert about lifeboat scenarios. Let's move on to the intrinsicists. The intrinsicists are those who say that no, there's right and wrong, but it exists independently of what anyone thinks. In other words, for example, an intrinsicist might say, well, it's right because God said so. And it said so, you know, he said so in a book somewhere. Or, red things are always good to eat, period. No holds barred. They're always good for everyone to eat, regardless of their allergies, regardless of what they like to eat, and etc. So the intrinsicist essentially says, one rule fits all in all circumstances. And so we have two people sitting in a life raft, and the intrinsicist is asked, is it right for X to kill Y? And he says, absolutely not, let's say. Well, okay, then not. But what if the intrinsicist says yes, that it's absolutely right for X to kill Y? Well, then it's also absolutely right for Y to kill X. Why? Because the same rules apply to everybody. It's independent of any particular person's mind. So if it's right for X to kill Y, and it's right for Y to kill X, then it's also true that it's right for X to die, and it's right for Y to die. In other words, let's look at Y. It's at the same time and in the same situation, in the same place, it's both right for X to live and right for X to die. Or, put it another way, it's both the case that X's highest value is his own life, and not the case that X's highest value is his own life. In fact, it could be that his highest value is his own life, and simultaneously that his highest value is his own death. Why? Because, well, that's what morality dictates for Y. So the intrinsicist runs into contradictions. He cannot find a set of rules that are applicable consistently, that are not contradictory. And therefore he ends up with no answer, an answer that can't be demonstrated to be true. Now let's move off and go on to the objectivist situation. The objectivist says, what are the facts of reality? What is the nature of man, the thinking animal, the rational animal, the animal that survives by thinking, by producing values? What is man's highest value? His own life. What is man's purpose? His own happiness. What is the standard by which we determine something to be good or to be evil for a given person? That life, human life, the needs of humanity on this earth. And what is man's highest virtue? Rationality, the very tool that makes the production of values and happiness possible. Now, if you do some Googling, you'll undoubtedly see that there are some people who subscribe to Objectivism who claim that under Objectivism, the right answer would be that in a lifeboat scenario, in an emergency, ethics don't apply. So on YouTube, for example, our own ex-omniverse has said ethics don't apply, so it wouldn't be wrong for you to murder and eat the other lifeboater.
I think that in this scenario, it is, although unfortunate, it would be ethical in order to kill and eat the other person. The reason I think this is, once again, we are outside the context of normal human conduct.
And my understanding is that Exomniverse believes that this is the logical consequence of objectivist metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. I think he's utterly incorrect, as are the many other objectivists I've seen on various discussion boards who say that ethics don't apply in emergency situations. I don't think that's the correct interpretation of Rand's objectivism in a lifeboat situation. She certainly did say that if you're trying to discover morality, you don't take an artificial situation, one in which production isn't possible, one in which rationality has no role, and then base your ethics on that. She certainly said that, and that's why she rejected the lifeboat as the starting place for the development of a code of ethics. However, I don't think she said something that would say, in the lifeboat, ethics doesn't apply, so go ahead, be a cannibal. She did not say, and I don't think it's a rational interpretation of what she did say, that it is right to pursue one's own happiness or to continue one's own survival by murdering someone else and eating them. Now, consider some of the implications of the position that ethics doesn't apply in a lifeboat, therefore it's right to murder and eat, another lifeboater. One implied assumption is that one's own life is one's highest value. I'm talking about the objectivists who assert this. They're assuming that one's own life is one's highest value, that it's right to live. That's an ethical assumption. That's an assertion of ethics. They're assuming that the purpose of a person's life continues to be, in a lifeboat, the pursuit of one's own happiness. That, too, is an ethical assertion. So they're not really saying that ethics don't apply in a lifeboat. What they're saying is that virtue doesn't apply in a lifeboat. If ethics doesn't apply in a lifeboat, if that's really what they mean, then life is not one's highest value in a lifeboat. There's no reason to prefer living over dying, or dying over living. There's no way to put a value on life. Life could be worth nothing. Death could be worth nothing. There are no values. In a lifeboat scenario, if ethics don't apply, then life has no purpose. Happiness isn't one's purpose. The pursuit of happiness is not one's purpose. Neither is the pursuit of misery. There is no purpose if ethics don't apply in a lifeboat. There's no reason, if ethics doesn't apply, not to assert that one should, offer oneself up to be killed and eaten, that it's wrong to pursue one's own misery. In fact, if ethics don't apply in a lifeboat at all, then not even non-objectivist ethics apply. In other words, emotionalism doesn't apply. There's no reason to prefer following your whims, your emotionally driven whims, over, for example, obedience to the will of Allah or anybody else, or to obedience to the will of others sitting in the lifeboat. There's no way to say that it's right to do what you feel you should do, but it's wrong to obey what others told you to do in the lifeboat. There's no way to do that, no way to make that decision if ethics don't apply in the lifeboat scenario. The fact of the matter is that when a person says ethics don't apply in a lifeboat, therefore it's right to kill and eat the other lifeboater, one is smuggling in, implicitly, both the ethical values and ethical purpose. They're sneaking that in the back door and then claiming that ethics don't apply. What they really want to do is reject virtue. Now, what is man's highest virtue? Rationality. It subsumes the other virtues that are found in the objectivist system, in fact. So when a person, an alleged objectivist in particular, says, there are no ethics in a lifeboat, therefore you should kill and eat the other guy in order to guarantee your survival or to prolong your survival. What they're really saying is, by saying you should jettison rationality, man's highest virtue, what they're really saying is you should cease to choose to be man. Because man is the human who has chosen to think, who has refused not to be rational. And so what they're saying is, when you're in a lifeboat, you need not be man. You can resort to being an animal. You can resort to being merely human, but not man. In a lifeboat, A is no longer A, man is no longer man. Or they're asserting that man is not the rational animal in a lifeboat. Man, we redefine now man in a lifeboat to be, the brute, the mindless brute. And then when he's rescued, he pops back into being the rational animal. There's an identity violation going on in the thinking of a person who says that, the axiom of identity I'm referring to, who says that in a lifeboat ethics don't apply, therefore murder and eat the other lifeboater. Now keep in mind, situations do not change the nature of man. The fact that you're in a lifeboat does not mean that man is not the rational animal. The only thing that can change your nature is your choice. Man has free will, and only the exercise of that free will determines whether man ceases to be man or man continues to be man, whether human becomes man or refrains from becoming man. The environment around one's self does not make someone not man. It's a choice. And another implication, therefore, of saying that ethics don't apply in a lifeboat is that metaphysics changes a person from being a man into a non-man. That man does not have free will. An objectivist would not murder and eat his fellow lifeboater. An objectivist would not temporarily suspend being man. He would not temporarily resort to being not thinking, to being a non-thinking brute, to refusing to use his rationality. Blanking out, ceasing to be rational while in the lifeboat, will only guarantee that person, and the objectivist knows this, a lifelong life of guilt, shame, and pain. That's all that will result, and the objectivist knows it. An objectivist never chooses not to be man. The objectivist never allows difficult situations in which it's not possible to be productive, to produce values, to prolong one's life, or to pursue one's happiness. Does not allow those situations to cause him to choose, or does not choose on the basis of those situations to cease to be rational, to cease to be man. Tied to a torture rack and facing possible death, he does not choose not to think in order to survive. He knows that that's a choice really between death from thinking and being tortured to death, and death by not thinking. It's a false choice between death and death. The objectivist knows that rationality is not a guarantee of his own survival. but the objectivist also knows that there's nothing to be gained from ceasing to be rational, from ceasing to be man.